Good morning and welcome to Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. While various products may be discussed during the course of this program, please note that these discussions are intended only to educate you about financial topics. They are broad in scope and do not consider your individual personal financial situation. You should work with a qualified financial professional in collaboration with your attorney and tax advisor before implementing any financial decisions which will affect your personal financial situation. Thrivent financial representatives cannot provide legal or tax advice. Your local Thrivent representatives are Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731. And now, Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell.
Welcome into this week's edition of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Our guest today in studio, Jim Jensen. Jim Jensen is not affiliated with or endorsed by Thrivent Financial for Lutherans. The views expressed in this presentation by Jim are his own and not necessarily those of Thrivent Financial or its affiliates. The material presented has been obtained from sources we believe to be reliable and is current. Happy New Year's Eve.
Happy New Year, Steph.
How are you, Scott?
Just absolutely great.
Good.
Finally, this 2011 comes to a close.
Yeah, finally, huh? Well, in terms of, I suppose, anything financial, yes, good riddance to 2011.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I was reading an article yesterday, and the way the journalist had posed the question, he said, if I had fallen asleep on January 1st of 2011, and January 1st,
First day, yep.
And then woke up now, I would have found the markets to be in precisely the same spot that we started at. But how we got to the same spot was extremely volatile.
Yeah.
So, basically in the markets overall, the S&P 500, the broader market, did nothing from the standpoint of the index itself beginning to end. The Dow Jones Industrial Average had a slight increase only because of the last few days where we picked up a little ground. But what a year. I mean, everything from budget deficits to the Eurozone crisis.
Right. We had our government shutdown.
All of the stuff that went on this year was absolutely made it a very, very volatile year. And one of the more stodgy kinds of investments seemed to perform the best. Those utilities, so... those boring things sometimes really work well. So it was a very, very interesting year for sure.
Well, fitting for our topic today to be our financial New Year's resolutions. But before we get into it, every week, Scott, we like to talk about the previous week in financial markets. What do people need to know if they want to insulate themselves from all the volatility we've been seeing?
Right. Well, and I always talk about making sure you've got adequate defense in the portfolio. And also, reflect on the fact a lot of people, of course, will get their statements on their 401ks and will show this fund did well and this fund did not do well. And people have this tendency to say, gosh, let's put more money in that fund that did so well. And that's usually not the right thing to do. When you look backwards, you can't chase returns. You can't get the return of what's happened before. And there are a lot of diagrams and studies out that show that it's very rare when the same category repeats itself for the next year. So first of all, a broad, balanced, diversified portfolio is usually the best strategy for people to really take a look at. So, and to make sure that portfolio meets your risk tolerance, another very, very important thing. And then I've always said, get great defense. And it doesn't have to be your traditional defense of, putting more money in cash reserve, although, one of the things the recession has taught us is that we need more money in cash reserve than maybe that 6 months earmark that we've talked about over the last 25 or 30 years. So maybe increase that a little bit. But the point is, make sure that you have sat down, had a meeting with a financial advisor, and really assessed, do I have enough defense in this portfolio overall? We've got an election year coming up. The probability that we're going to get a lot of volatility is quite high.
Because of the election year?
Well, I think that when everything's Wall Street really does not like uncertainty. We're going to talk a little bit about uncertainty here today with Jim Jensen. And Jim, I'm just delighted that you're here again with us. Your years of experience in financial services industry, your experience as a consultant, and working with the Lennox Aberman Group, your experience with ownership at the Chanhassen Dinner Theater. We really, really appreciate you bringing all of that to the table with us here today. But, just to finish this point is, very frankly, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty this year. And in uncertainty, the markets will be typically pretty volatile. We've still got a lot of things that are kind of sitting on the edge. We're hopeful that this European crisis is moving towards some kind of resolution. However, we know that along the way that there's going to be some very big bumps in that road, and that's going to create some market volatility. Now, how many of our listeners think that probably sometime this year our Congress is going to have difficulty deciding on something?
What?
I mean, do you think that that's a possibility?
They seem to think they're going to be done with the session by April.
And here we have, a bill to extend the reduction in payroll taxes that's extended it for 2 months. So how many of our listeners think that maybe they're going to fight over that all over again? Those are the kinds of things. When you take a look at the really deep dives of the market this last year, that August dive that came after Congress was unable, because two things happened, right? First of all, Standard & Poor's cut the rating of U.S. bonds from AAA down to a AA status. And of course, what did investors do? When you take a look at what followed the next couple of months, they bought more bonds. Interesting, isn't it? Everybody is all worried about what's going to happen when they cut the rating and we're not going to be AAA anymore. And as a matter of fact, people ended up buying more bonds. Why did they buy more bonds? They were looking for a flight to quality, and it turns out that that really didn't affect bond buying all that much on an international basis. But my whole point is we're going to see some volatility. Make sure you're positioned well for it, and that does not mean, and here's where people categorically get themselves in trouble, is they say, well, if it's going to be a volatile market, I'm just going to put everything into some safe and guaranteed kind of investment, and then they're going to end up with about 1% or some cases a 0.5% rate of return on their money overall. And that, especially if you're either approaching retirement or in retirement, is a really tough way to live, is when your investments are just not moving forward for you. So the big message here: get good defense, get good diversification, get good balance, and make sure that you've got a good plan for the income stream if you're retired. And the last thing, of course, is that cash reserve. So enough about that. I maybe said too much already about that.
We have a guest we want to meet.
Yeah, right. Huh?
I said we have a guest we want to meet.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
We've got Jim Jensen here. I've already said just a really quick couple of things about Jim. And Jim's been on the show before. I love to have him back because he's always so insightful. And thanks, Jim, for being here and helping us close the first year of Financial Strategies, because we started in, I think, January the 8th.
We did.
And here we are at the end of the year. And you can help us reflect not only on this year, but we're going to talk about financial New Year's resolutions, and we can really dive right into that. So let's get started with that.
So today's topic is 7 financial New Year's resolutions. I know that you and Jim each have a resolution that you're going to prompt us to consider. Jim, I'm going to cover the strategic view, and Scott, you're going to give us the action item. Let's start with number 1. Tell us who this resolution is for.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Scott and Thriving Financial for having me on. I just love doing this show. I actually was on your second show of the year, and I get to be on your last show of the year. So
right.
The bookends.
Kind of the bookends.
Yeah,
there you go.
So that's kind of nice. This is a great time of year, not just because it's holiday and family and all that, but because we get a chance to reflect. And we get a chance to think about what went well in the last year. And from that, we figure out what's important to us. And we also get a chance to think about what didn't go so well.
Right.
And that's a great teacher. And given all these great reflections, now we get to look forward and say, how will we make next year better? How will we make it different? And that's what leads to these resolutions to change something. So it's a great time of year. I think it's important that everybody does that.
It really is.
I do that every year.
Yeah, it's a really, really good process. And I don't know, Jim, that everybody does do that. Right. But I think that hopefully one of the outcomes of today's show, after listening to our discussion, will say, we need to do that. We need to stop and we need to say, and I like the way you set that up, to say, what really did go well for you? What were your best moments?
Right. Because everybody has best moments, too.
Exactly. And that tells you something about yourself, It tells you something about what gets you excited, what drives you, and then your toughest moments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And tough moments do teach you a lot.
Yeah.
Looking back, I learn a lot from what did not go well.
Absolutely.
Hopefully I learn and hopefully I change.
You got it.
On to my number one. Here's my number one thing. And by the way, Scott's going to give you 7 if we manage our time well, and I'll give you 7. So that's 14. And what I would suggest to listeners is don't try to do 14.
Right.
Like anything else, any type of financial advice or suggestions, it's specific to the situation, specific to the person.
Right.
So if you can find 1 or 2 of these that make sense to you, try them. And if you really find they're working so well and you wish you had the rest of the list, I'm going to guess if you contact Scott's office, he'll get you the rest of the list.
You got it.
So,
exactly.
So my number 1, in 2012, I'll make financial decisions that align both with who I ideally want to be and the package of what I'm trying to accomplish.
Sure.
So make decisions that are consistent with who I want to be and with what I'm trying to get done. That seems real obvious. It seems really simple, but it's actually quite hard.
It is.
Because most people don't stop and think, who am I ideally? And what am I really about? Nor do they take the time to think about what their goals really are and what they're trying to accomplish. And even if they've taken the time to figure those things out, when it comes decision time, they forget to use them. And so it needs to be a real conscious decision and a conscious question that you ask yourself, is this decision that I'm making consistent with who I really want to be and consistent with what I'm trying to do?
And that really kind of goes back to, I know in one of the previous shows, Jim, you talked about using the values cards.
Correct.
And because, I think people know for the most part who they are, but having them define themselves
Right.
and say, here are my top values, gets enormous amount of clarity. And I think that's where you're going with this one.
Right. What I've learned about myself, for example, is that caring and giving and helping others and meaningful work, these
Sure.
are things that mean a lot to me. A lot. And not that I ever would have thought those things didn't mean something, but when I specifically articulate them and write them down and look at them,
Right.
and I remind myself that that's what I'm really about. When I go to make a decision, I make a decision more aligned with who I am.
Fantastic.
And that's when I can stay with for the long term.
No, that's great. And when you've got those things written down, then you can actually take the dilemma or the decision you're about to make, put it in front of those values,
Right.
and then say, okay, if I go this way, is it about my caring side?
Right.
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 Okay, that's a really good point. Okay, so here's my number one,
Okay.
and we are intentionally on 2 different planes here today.
Okay.
Okay.
Ooh, I'm going to try to track this. Okay.
So, because I think it's really important for people when they look at their finances to say, what's first? If I'm going to make progress this year, and one of my favorite things is to help people understand their own situation is what we call the 5 S's. So the very base of the 5 S's, people are surviving, and those are people that are just really living day to day, sometimes even moment to moment, and things are not going all that well for them. And our goal, or I hope the goal of many people, is to help them to get to the next level, which is not that much better, but it's struggling. And those that are in the struggling category, they're living paycheck to paycheck, but there is something that is going in their favor. Maybe it's their job. Then after struggling, you get to stable. And people are stable usually have a time frame that they can look out to about a year or so, but they can do a little bit of planning along the way. After stable, you get to secure. And this is a spot where most people cite as the goal for themselves. If I can get secure so that, my ship is solid, it's sailing, and it's on smooth waters, then I'm secure. But finally, in one of the most really enjoyable categories to work with people on is those that are in the surplus. They go from secure to surplus because, as Jim is talking about here in terms of his values of caring for people, when you have built your financial plan and gotten to the point you have surplus, you can start to do some giving and some other things along the way,
Correct.
some sharing. So my first resolution that I give to people today is really very much at the base, and that is if you have non-deductible high interest rate debt, i.e. credit cards, pay that off first. So if someone says, I got this financial mess in front of me and I don't know what to do first, that's usually a very, very good first choice. Now, I think there's people at many of those categories, people that are in the surviving category, in the struggling category, even in the stable category, that still have some ugly, high-interest, non-deductible debt. And you've got to put a plan together this year to get rid of that and stay rid of that. In 30 years in this business, I cannot think of a person who has achieved the level of surplus who still carries around any kind of ugly debt with them. They either never did it because they had a certain value to avoid it, and that's the way most of them are, right, or they somehow had a wake-up call along the way that said, this is really bad stuff, and I'm going to get rid of it, and I'm never going back. So number one New Year's resolution on the action item is pay off that bad debt.
All right. Jim, you want to give us your number 2?
My number 2 actually ties to my number 1, and that is in 2012, I'll make thoughtful rather than emotional financial decisions.
Oh, that's hard.
It is hard. Especially in this market, it's very hard. And it goes back to what Scott was saying. Our brains are wired in a way that we actually, when we're high emotions, either high or low, our brains stop thinking, and our emotions take over. Mm-hmm. So when the market is going up or a stock is going up, our emotions are saying, oh boy. And here we go, we jump in with everything we got.
Right.
So we buy high when the price is high. When the market goes low or a stock goes low, now we panic and we say, oh no, and now we bail out. When you buy high and you sell low, that is not going to actually work for you over the long run.
It seems obvious, but you know what? It is a hard thing for many people to do.
There's a study by an organization called Delbar that actually shows it over the last 20 years. Ending in 2010, the average S&P return was 9.1%. Conversely, the average equity investor only made 3.8%. That means 58% of what that market was giving you was thrown away.
Right.
And a lot of that is attributable to the fact that emotions drive those decisions. So my resolution is, when it's time to make a financial decision and I feel my emotions are in play, I'm going to take a break. That's why we have the draft key on the computer, by the way, my own personal draft key, and I will wait and come back to it the next day and make a thoughtful decision.
Great advice, great advice. And I think before I get to my number 2, Steph, we probably need to take a break. Yeah,
okay, absolutely. I was going to say, we could try to squeeze yours in, but squeeze doesn't often work with Scott. So. We'll come back. Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell continues next.
How would your financial life improve if you changed just one thing? Avoid ATM fees, make your gifts rather than buy them, protect yourself from identity theft, save more for your family's future. The list goes on. If you heard something today on financial strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/onething. Think about your finances, your lifestyle, your wants versus your needs. What one thing can you change today and see the impact tomorrow? Perhaps your family will save all your change for a month and donate it to charity. Maybe you'll finally write a will. Whether you choose to start simple or take a big step, that one thing can really make a difference. If you heard something today on financial strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your financial life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/onething.
Welcome back to Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Welcome into this week's edition. Steph Schmidt with you, Scott Wardell, and our guest Jim Jensen in studio. Before we get back into your New Year's financial resolutions, we always have a special free offer.
We do, and we're talking resolutions here today, and so we're really focused on having people, as Jim said earlier, reflect on last year and make some changes to take them into the new year, and hopefully and predictably get themselves into a better situation. I should say planfully get themselves into a better situation. So today's free offer is a brochure and a kit. It's called Reach Your Goals. And what it has in it, we're going to package it with an expense worksheet as well as a financial snapshot. It's something that people can fill out. And what is accompanied with this for our callers today is that they can get a free consultation. And I would consider this, of all the offers we've had all year, to be the thing that is most likely to help them with their finances, get a really good view of exactly where they're at. One of the most important things in making progress on your finances is to have a really good sense of exactly where you're at. and it is a free consultation. So
No strings attached,
No
right?
strings
Yep.
attached whatsoever. So if people will call this number, if you go get yourself a pencil, I'm going to give it to you twice, but it is 1-855, it's a toll-free number, 346-4332. We've got our financial representatives throughout the listening area. We can hook you up with a free consultation in your locale. So here it is again, 1-855-346-4332. So it's a voice message recording system. Leave your name, your address for us to send the kit, and your phone number, and we'd be more than happy to send out this kit that's called Reach Your Goals. It's a brochure with some worksheets in it, as well as provide to you a free consultation if you'd like to have that as well. So back to our topic today.
Yeah, we have 14 goals, as I understand.
14 goals.
Jim has 7 and Scott has 7.
So we better get moving
We
here.
better. We've heard Jim's first 2, but only one from you, Scott. What's your second?
Okay. My second one here is really to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table. Absolutely make sure you're getting 100% of the match on whatever kind of retirement plan you might have. So, of course, if you're self-employed, you're not going to be in a situation where you're able to get a match unless you're self-employed with a big enough organization that the company has got a match that goes with you. But for most of the other folks, they've got a 401k, they've got a 403b, they might have a 457 deferred comp, regardless of what kind of retirement plan you have got. Go in, have a conversation with your human resource department, make certain you know exactly the amount of the match, and get 100% of it. Why leave that money on the table? There's nothing financially that will even beat a 25% match. You think of it, if every time I put $1 in that account, my employer puts 25 cents, that's a 25% immediate return on your investment, even if you stick it in cash, folks. Don't leave that money on the table. And most 401k plans today have a 50 cents on the dollar up to some dollar limit. I have consultations with people all the time who say, well, gosh, they reduced that. I don't know how much they reduced it to, but I'm not sure if I'm getting it or not. You've got to take that measure. So that's my resolution number 2. So,
you know, Scott, what makes me feel good is I did your first 2 resolutions. My wife and I got rid of all that debt a long time ago.
right.
Because it just became stupid at some point. We didn't want it anymore. I got rid of it and never went back.
Right.
Very
That's
smart.
great.
And we did the second one, too. So I'm 2 for 2 on you. Proud of that.
That's why you are where you are.
You know, Scott, I know the next one you've got a lot of passion around. Why don't you talk about that one?
Absolutely. Well, and you know, the thing that has happened through this last recession is people's benefit packages have changed, not just their 401k as we were talking about, but for many people who have lost their jobs and gone back to work, many of them have gone back to work in a consulting perspective. They do not necessarily have the full benefit package they have, and a lot of people have just cruised along and not paid much attention to this. My number 3 resolution is to make sure that you have adequate protection for your family, for you and your family. So number 1, take a look at your health insurance. How are we covered? You know, I could tell a story about a period of time when I changed jobs, and there was 3 days, Jim, that I was not covered by health insurance because of this job change, and I didn't get on the new system. I sat and wrung my hands because I thought, this would be the day that something is going to happen to me.
Yep.
Do not go a day, if you can help it, without good health insurance
And
coverage.
if I may, beginning of this year, I had a turn where I was going to be off my parents' insurance, and I thought about kind of going without for a bit.
Oh, boy.
And this summer, I tore my ACL. I wound up in surgery. I had to stay with my, and had I not had health insurance, I just would have been hung out to dry.
Right.
So it happens when you don't think it's going to happen.
So many bankruptcies are health related, and I think the highest percentage of bankruptcies actually are health related. And of course, many divorces are finance related. And when you look back and say, what created this financial disaster for this family where the marriage broke up, often it was because some health concern put them out of work and had high expenses. So it is really, really important. The other thing is disability income insurance. When I say protect your family, your ability to earn your living is key to your family's success. And frankly, I think the life insurance industry has done a fairly good job getting people to realize that you shouldn't be walking around without some life insurance because your family needs the amount of revenue that you're able to produce. But for most people at most ages, disability is a far greater probability. Because if you're long-term disabled, there goes your income. So make sure you have got good disability coverage. And what does that mean? It could mean going into the human resource department again and finding out and making sure that you signed up for the right coverage. But it also could mean if you don't have it, go investigate. Getting it on your own is really important. And of course, the last piece that I want to throw out there about protecting your family is life insurance, because again, you are really an economic well. If you're working, you've got a certain reserve, and you have to insure that well, frankly. Right. And part of what goes along with that is make sure also that you've got the right life insurance architecture. This is not up to your employer. This is up to you. And frankly, a lot of people say, oh, I've got life insurance at work. Yeah, you have life insurance at work, but when you quit working and retire, that life insurance ends. And you need to sit down with a financial advisor and find out what good life insurance architecture looks like, because for most people, that means a continuation of part of that into retirement. You know what that means? Part of your life insurance should be permanent. So my number 2, and you're right, I couldn't have possibly squeezed that into the few minutes of the break.
It was too good.
Is to protect your family.
Jim, your number 3?
My number 3 is in 2012, I'll create at least one good financial habit. My good friend and business partner, Doug Lennox, always likes to say that habits save us when discipline fails.
Yes.
And what I think we do is we tend to develop bad habits. Anybody who's seen me play golf can pick many bad habits that I have on the golf course. But we can purposely create good habits, too. Do things that just become so habitual. We actually, and this is a little neurological, but we actually store these things in a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. And it's a very low-energy part of the brain. And we don't even have to think. It just happens. I put 91 cents in my right pocket every day of my life. I don't even remember doing it this morning, but I know I got 91 cents in my right pocket. It's just one of those things that I do so frequently, you don't even remember doing it. And that's what we can do with good financial habits. So, for example, saving a percentage or a dollar amount from every single paycheck, where you don't even think about it. And a lot of employers can help you do that, where you don't even have to see it.
Right.
And just routinely do it and make it a habit. Making your own coffee. My wife makes wonderful coffee, and then I don't have to go and spend $2 to $3 a cup.
Right.
And I noticed Scott brought his thermos this morning, too.
I don't go anywhere without my thermos.
And over time, this really adds up. I mean, just simple little habits you can do that actually make you feel good about yourself and actually add up over time. And then, as Scott said, maximize your 401k match. Very, very smart. So do those simple little financial habits. That's my number 3.
And that's wonderful, because I think you're exactly right, Jim, in that those things that you can put into a system so that you don't see the money, as an example, whether it's a bank authorization, whether it is the payroll deduction for your 401k. And one other one I'll throw out there is, you may know this, but Thrivent sponsors a program called Simply Giving, because for those people that want to give, for instance, to their church and want to do it on a weekly basis, one of the things that many people face is, well, what happens if I miss a week at church? Do I remember to make it up the next week? Well, what the Simply Giving program is a way to take bank authorization and make your charitable contribution go to that church, whether you show up or not, which for a lot of people in the summertime can really help make sure that they're current, and also really helps those organizations so they have consistent cash flow. So I'm with you totally. Habits are absolutely the way to go with this.
Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell, and our guest in studio today is Jim Jensen. We're talking about some suggested New Year's resolutions that can help almost everyone, I think, in very different planes so far. I'm catching on to that. We've covered the top 3 for both of you. Who's going to walk us through number 4?
I'll start with number 4, if that's okay, Scott.
Absolutely.
In 2012, my number 4, I will set a good financial example for my children. Mm-hmm. And this is interesting for me because my wife and I don't have any children.
Sure.
But it puts us in a position to watch other people and what they do. And for me personally, I mean, I've worked really hard, and I've saved, and my wife and I have worked really hard together to build a good financial future, because that's what our parents did. You know, my parents grew up in South Minneapolis, never made a great deal of money, but they worked really hard. We always had what we needed. They saved. My mom went to work when my brother and I were getting close to really thinking about college. They put us both through college. They had a wonderful retirement, lived into their mid-90s. My mother is still 95 and a half.
Wonderful.
Doing great and financially sound. And they never had a lot, but they've had a wonderful financial life, and money has never been an issue for them.
That is fantastic.
And so the suggestion is, if you don't do it for yourself, do it for your kids, because your kids are watching you. They learn from you all the time.
Absolutely. And you know, we're in an era where we have done a lot to take care of kids, in some cases too much, the helicopter mom and dad.
Yeah.
So we talked about this when we were talking about Christmas last week, is that often what happens is the kids start to think about Christmas and other holidays as the time of getting. And what we really want them to learn is it's the time of giving.
Yes.
So one quick suggestion right along your lines of make a good example is, you know, right now with both of my kids, because I want to make sure that whatever stage they're at, that the sharing part of their life is existent. So I said, look, Dad's your matching funds up to $50 between now and the end of the year for whatever charity you want to contribute to. So you tell me the charity, and I'm going to contribute $50 alongside your $50. So, you know, why am I doing that? I want them to get, to your former resolution, into the habit
Yes.
of being a good citizen and doing contribution. And I know my son can't hear me because he's in West Virginia, but I've not heard back from you yet. And you got to let me know today what it is I'm supposed to contribute to.
He's got the wallet out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, let's pause for a moment if we can.
Sure.
We'll come back and we'll get Scott's fourth resolution
Sounds good.
on financial strategies with Scott Wardell. Stay tuned.
Nearly 3 million members look to Thrivent Financial for Lutherans to help them achieve their financial goal. Nearly 3 million people know that Thrivent Financial is committed to excellence in financial services and caring for others. Get to know Thrivent Financial and the quality of products and services they can offer you. In Minnesota, you have a host of representatives to help you with your financial needs. Contact your local Thrivent representatives Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731 or call 1-855-346-4332. Registered representatives for securities offered through Thrivent Investment Management Incorporated, member FINRA and SIPC.
Welcome into this week's edition of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Thanks for joining us again today, and Happy New Year's Eve to all of you, and to our guests, Jim Jensen and Scott Wardell in studio today.
Happy New Year to you, Steph.
Do we want to mention our free offer once again?
Absolutely.
We try to do that
Yep.
every break or so.
Absolutely. The free offer today, we've got a brochure that is called Reach Your Goals, and it's really a brochure with all sorts of good stuff in it. And one of the things we're going to send out is the personal expense worksheet. Very few people really understand their own cash flow, and this is something we try and drill on the show a lot, is to say, get a good handle of what your cash flow and your expenses are, and also in there is what's called a financial snapshot. And then along with all of this, today we are offering a free consultation in all of our listing areas. It's available to people that can sit down with one of our financial representatives, and you get that by calling this number. So if you've got a pencil, write this one down. 1-855, toll-free number, 1-855-346-4332. Leave your name, your address for the brochure and the kit, and leave us a phone number, and we'll get back to you hopefully within this next week or so.
As we wrap up the year 2011, we're thinking about 2012, our New Year's financial resolutions with Scott and Jim today. We've gotten through, 4 for Jim and 3 for Scott. So we have to get your
I
fourth
got to
yet.
catch up here a little bit, don't I? Well, this next one's pretty simple. Create an emergency fund. If one of the things that this recession has taught us is that we need more cash reserve on hand to help us through these particularly tough times, to help some people through job changes and transitions and unemployment.
Like the defense that you mention almost
Absolutely.
every week. Yeah.
It is actually part of a good plan. So if you feel like you don't have enough cash reserve, remember the first thing we said was to make sure you pay down that ugly debt, the non-deductible debt, but then you've got to get into starting to create a cash reserve for yourself. There's a lot of good ways to do it. People will say, gosh, where do I put that today? That's a conversation with your financial advisor, and there are some good opportunities that are out there that pay better than zero. Exactly. So that's my number 4.
You know, Scott, I know you like to be out front, so why don't you just keep going with the first part of number 5?
Okay, sounds good. Well, you know, Jim, I am big on goal setting, and of course, I know you are as well, because you really talk a lot about getting your values lined up with your goals, and that is a really important part of the piece. So when we talk about goal setting, make sure that if you've got some things that are out there on that horizon, whether it's college funding for your kids, retirement planning, estate planning, start to identify what your goals are. I'll tell you, it makes life easier, and it makes the markets and your investment plan easier when you say, okay, let's just take retirement as an example. If I say I'm going to retire 8 years from now, and I know approximately what I've got to have on hand, I've got some plan in place, then what it starts to take away is this perspective that I hear way too often, and that is this: I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to retire. I hear that way too often. And when you start to put that plan in place, it takes that away. It gives you great clarity in your actions. So my number 5 is make a plan, identify those goals, and really start to dive into what's underneath that. So if your plan is, I need to have my will and my power of attorney and some things updated this year, then start to put some deadlines around that and say, we're going to have this done by June of this year, or we're going to start this plan. For instance, I was working with a business owner this last week. I called him up and I said, you know, you've been talking about starting a simplified employee pension for yourself, and you've been talking about getting this disability coverage. It seems to me the last time we talked, you wanted to do that for 2012. It's right around the corner. He says, you're absolutely right. Let's get that started. That's what planning does for you.
Right. And you know, Scott, when I think back to when I left my financial services career, and the market was at a certain level the day I left, within 12 months it was half of what it was the day I left.
Yowzer.
And emotions are hitting you, and you're ready to say, oh my God, it's time to get out. But then you stop and go, no, wait a minute. This money is for retirement.
Right.
At the time I was, 53 years old. Retirement's still a ways off.
Sure.
And so you take a deep breath, and you just let it come back up. And now it's back to, I think, almost identically what it was when back in December of 2007.
Right.
And I could have locked in that loss forever.
Sure.
But
sure,
I
if you'd
didn't, because
panicked.
a plan helped me, and that made all the difference for me, controlling emotions and that.
Fantastic. Well, Jim, your number 5.
My number 5. In 2012, it's kind of getting at the efficiency of the deal, and that is I will find ways to, number 1, earn more, number 2, spend wisely, number 3, waste less, and number 4, save more. And I'm going to do all those things. The first one is the one that a lot of people forget about. Maybe there are ways that I can earn a little bit more. Maybe I can do things on my job that would make me a little more proficient and do a better job that may actually lead me to more money. Maybe a promotion, maybe a different kind of job. Maybe there's education I could get. Maybe I could arrive to work 15 minutes early every day rather than 15 minutes late. Maybe somebody might notice that.
Sure.
And actually pay me a little more money. And note that I said spend wisely and waste less. I'm not saying spending less.
Sure.
Just when you do spend, make sure it's smart and try not to waste.
Sure.
I hate waste. We all hate waste. And looking back, that's when we have remorse. And then lastly, try to save more. If you've done this well and you have a little more, put it aside. My parents, they saved up until they were 90.
Sure.
Because it was such a good habit for them. It was really hard for them to stop when they were 90. And my mom still wants to save money, you know.
Absolutely.
Which is wonderful. But it's just being efficient in your financials. So that's my number 5.
You know, it's interesting, Jim, because these things that we're talking about here today, and when you reference, your mom still wanting to spend, these things become hardwired in us after a while. In the beginning, they're not.
Right.
But then after, and I know there's an old adage that says 28 days makes a great habit. My personal experience is 60 days. Because if I do something 60 days, because the thing with a great habit is what you're trying to do is you're trying to make it as automatic as brushing your teeth. Right. Jim said stuff you don't have to think about.
Right.
It takes at least 60 days to do that, very frankly, in repetition, and then it comes into being. So you're talking about people that have habits on spending wisely and waste less.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if you can ever get to the spot where you waste nothing, but waste less. Really, really great advice.
Right.
So, I know a lot of people, Jim, have really become disgruntled, with investments over the last couple of years because of where the markets have been here. Tell us a little bit about resolution number 6,
Well,
and really how the mindset that goes along with that.
okay. Number 6 goes back to another thing that my good friend and partner Doug Lennox says, and that is that I'll accept the certainty of uncertainty, and I'll plan accordingly. If we've all figured out anything over the last few years, is that we don't know what's going to happen next.
Right.
You talk about the market and the S&P, it ended where it started. Think of the volatility. Think of the overinflated headlines that we saw in the newspaper every day.
Yeah,
And think of how
400 up, 400 down,
Yeah.
yo-yo.
Yeah, and it all worked out to be, as Shakespeare would say, much ado about nothing. But the certainty of uncertainty, it's true in the market. I'm just as an example, and this is more on the health insurance side to tie back to one of your comments. I took a nasty fall about a month ago, arguably the worst fall I've ever taken.
Wow.
One that actually could have killed me, could have left me disabled, could have run huge medical bills, and I was lucky that it didn't happen. But it could have, and everybody knows somebody that that's happened to. And preparing yourself is something that you can very easily do. And Scott was talking about insurance is a really good way to do that. Some other things I think you can do. Think about being a little more diversified in your portfolio. That way you have winners and losers all at once. And on average, you probably do pretty well if you work with a good financial advisor. Keep a reasonable cash balance. Scott has referred to that one. And obviously protection on the healthcare side, even if you have to go with a high deductible plan. And pay some money out of pocket before it really kicks in, that saves you against the traumatic ones that can just ruin you.
Wonderful. Jim, when you say you took a bad fall, and we're talking about preparing for the certainty of uncertainty, you're not a fragile guy.
No.
And part of your preparation for taking something that you can't predict, a bad fall, is to keep yourself in good physical condition, because the odds are that you're going to make it through that a lot better if you're in good shape than if you've been sitting on the couch all year long.
Right.
So it's the same with your finances.
Correct.
You get that plan in place. You make sure you've got good defense in place. You have got good balance. So then when uncertainty comes, that's part of the preparation.
Right.
So
the line that I really like is wealth care and health care.
right.
Think about them both.
Absolutely. So my number 6 is keep investing. And when I say stay the course, I don't mean don't manage the investments or don't get help managing the investment. In fact, I think that your finances and your investments probably need more management. But what Jim talked about earlier is that if you sell out when the market is low, that's not management. That's just fear taking over, and that's really not going to work very well. But to tweak your portfolio along the path is usually a very, very good idea. So you have to pay attention to it. So keep investing, stay the course. And one of the things, there are risk mitigation techniques that people can use. Now, these techniques don't necessarily or I should say they don't guarantee that you're going to get a positive return, but they help put the probabilities in your favor. One of my favorites is dollar cost averaging. If you are investing in a 401k or an IRA or just plain investing, rather than lump sum into the market at any particular point in time and hope that that time is right, what you usually should do in most cases is to trickle it in over at least a 12-month period of time. That way, when the market is down, you buy more shares. When the market is up, you buy fewer shares just by keeping your dollar amount consistent. So one of the things that you should do, and you should get a good understanding of what dollar cost averaging is. But the other thing is, there's an old tip, by the way, on it's actually from Zig Ziglar. And so I know that dates me because a lot of people that are my age and older are fans of Zig Ziglar. But he had this great little motto that I've never forgotten. And it has to do with what helps you stay the course, whether you're going to try and lose weight, quit smoking, or improve your finances. And it's simple. It is share your go-up goals with everyone who is concerned, or excuse me, with those people that are concerned with your success, that want you to be successful. So it might be your inside group, those people that are rooting for you. Share your give-up goals with everyone. Frankly, back yourself into a corner and say, I'm going to give this thing up if you see me doing this, yada, yada. Okay, so I think that's a good way to stay the course. So that is my number 6.
All right. Well, we've gotten through both of Jim's and Scott's 6 resolutions. We have one more for each,
Yes.
and then we're going to recap them.
And then we're going to recap.
Let's pause quick. Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. We'll finish up the year 2011 next.
How would your financial life improve if you changed just one thing? Avoid ATM fees, make your gifts rather than buy them, protect yourself from identity theft, save more for your family's future. The list goes on. If you heard something today on financial strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing. Think about your finances, your lifestyle, your wants versus your needs. What one thing can you change today and see the impact tomorrow? Perhaps your family will save all your change for a month and donate it to charity. Maybe you'll finally write a will. Whether you choose to start simple or take a big step, that one thing can really make a difference. If you heard something today on financial strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your financial life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing.
Welcome back. This week's edition and the final edition for 2011 of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Scott in studio and guest Jim Jensen with us. Want to recap our free gift one more time for the week?
Absolutely. We've got a brochure that I'd really like for people to call in and get, and of course they've got to call our toll-free number to get it, but the brochure is called Reach Your Goals. It's a brochure and it's a kit that goes with it, with an expense worksheet and a financial snapshot to really prepare you for the most important part of today's free offer, and that is a free consultation. If you really want to make progress towards your goals, you're probably going to have to sit down and get a good partner to help you through it, so we're offering the free consultation. Here's how you get it. You call 1-855-346-4332 and just leave us your name, your address, a phone number, and we will send out this kit for you, and we'll also make available this free consultation with no strings attached to that. And also, I want people to know that they can go to thrivent.com/find an event to see what kind of seminars and workshops we've got going in their area if they want to attend any of these educational events as well. So
we're talking about those top New Year's financial resolutions heading into 2012. 7 total for Jim and 7 for Scott. We've gotten through 6 so far. For Scott, what is your final resolution for the year?
Well, actually, I'm going to hand that one over to Jim to have him lead that particular, his 7th, and I'm going to follow with mine. So, Jim, what would you say? What's your 7th resolution for our listeners?
My 7th is actually the one that my wife Sandy and I need to do, and that is...
That's fair.
Yeah, it's fair. I will review and adjust our will and trust agreements. Sandy and I actually sat down with an attorney and got this set up a number of years ago, but things change.
Of course they do.
And the will only works if it actually says to do what you want it to do. And the trust agreement, not an expert, but unless the trust owns the asset, it doesn't do you any good. And we have some different assets that we need the trust to own. So we're going to sit down with our attorney this year. Sandy, I'm saying we're going to do this, and we're going to actually get that done this year.
You know, Jim, it's so interesting. The number one problem that I see with people that go out and have trusts built as part of their estate plan is that then they don't move the assets into the trust. So they have this marvelous plan with nothing in it.
Right.
So that's a great one for our listeners who have not got their estate plan done or who have and haven't taken that final step.
Right.
My number 7 is, we talked earlier about pay down. My number 1 resolution was to make sure that people pay down their high interest non-deductible debt. But when you've got through all of those other things that we have suggested here financially, then my number 7 is pay down or refinance the tax deductible debt that you have, even if it is low interest, but certainly any high interest that you have. So take the time to find out. Interest rates are at a very, very low point historically. So if you're at a 6% interest rate, you probably should talk to somebody about refinancing if you can, if you've got that loan to equity thing going in your favor. But making sure, because here's the thing, as you approach retirement, one of the key things you're going to want to do, I always talk on the show about layers. Layers can be good if they're income. So you have to consider, what's my cash flow coming in? Layers are bad if they're expenses. So one of the layers you want to get rid of before you go into retirement, and I know other financial folks have disagreed with me for a long time, but you want to have that mortgage paid off as much as possible before you go into retirement, and if it's completely eliminated, that much the better. So that's my number 7. And Jim, we've been talking New Year's resolutions. Any other thoughts or guidance for our listeners on how they can really help themselves improve their financial situation over this next year?
Well, I'm going to sneak one more in here. It's not, I guess it kind of sounds like number 8. Okay, it is number 8. The last thought here is to create lasting and important memories with your money. It's about what you do with your money, and this is actually the fun one. And I know Scott and Barb pretty well, and I know they have the orchard, and I know how much that means to them, especially when they see families come and have that special day. And Scott was telling me a story about a little kid this morning, and it's just wonderful. And you see him light up, and I know that's not just where his wallet is, that's where his heart is.
But it's exactly the same with you and Chanhassen Dinner Theater.
Right.
I mean, every time you talk about Chanhassen Dinner Theater and the people that come and the enjoyment they get, and I hear you talk about them turning off their cell phones, focusing on something totally different,
right,
enjoying the time with their family.
Yes.
I mean, I can see the physical change in you as you talk about it because because it's lining up.
It's the world to me. And, people talk about us being investors. I talk about being owners because I own things I care about. I care about my home. I care about my dinner theater. I care about everybody who works there and everybody who comes there.
Yeah.
It is the most wonderful thing I have ever done with my money, and I will die so much happier because of the Chanhassen Dinner Theater. It's just spectacular.
You can see it in him right now at the moment. Okay? Isn't that fantastic?
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so that's what you're witnessing, Steph, and what hopefully our listeners can hear in Jim's voice is what happens when you get good alignment with your money. When you say, what are my goals, what are my dreams, what are my values, and how do my actions and my decisions line up with those values? And there's a lot of people that really use the phrase that money is at the root of all evil. Well, you know what? When money is used inappropriately or it doesn't align with your values, that's a hard point to argue. They're probably right. But when it aligns with your values, and last week we talked a little bit when we were doing our whole thing on the Christmas Carol, and we're looking at Ebenezer Scrooge. One of the questions we said, what's his relationship with money? And his relationship with money in the story was extremely negative because he measured his self-worth in accordance to his net worth. What Jim is talking about here is taking his use of his money to care and really bring people together in a very meaningful way. And you can see just what it does to him physically, and that's what we really want for people, especially when they get to that point in their life when they're secure and they're going into sharing, is to say, how can this money be a very, very positive thing for you?
Right, and when you do that, it just makes you feel so good all the time. And even when you have to do some of the things that might be a little tougher things to do, it just keeps you through. You just keep it in your heart, and it's just so wonderful.
Absolutely, and that's what I refer to as a great relationship with money, so that money does not rule Jim. Jim rules money.
Nice.
Scott, with our couple minutes left, can you give a quick summary of your suggested New Year's resolutions, and then Jim, we can do the same for us?
Absolutely. So let's start. My number 1 was pay off bad debt. That's credit card debt. Number 2 was get 100% of the matching funds that you're eligible for, whether it's a 401k, a 403b, whatever retirement program that you might be in. Number 3 is make sure your family is protected. That can be health insurance, disability insurance, life insurance. Number 4 was create an emergency fund to help you through these times of uncertainty, as Jim was talking about. Number 5 was create or update your financial plan. Make sure that you've got that plan in place and you've identified your goals. And number 6, keep investing, but get some defense put in there, people. This is the time to do it. And number 7, pay down other debt, like your mortgage, so you get rid of those layers as you go into retirement. So, Jim, your 7 again in recap.
First one, align your financial decisions with who you want to be and what you're trying to do. Secondly, make thoughtful rather than emotional financial decisions. Third, create at least one good financial habit. Number 4, set a good financial example for your children. Number 5, be more financially efficient. Number 6, prepare for the certainty of uncertainty. I like that one.
Yep.
And then 7, review and adjust any legal estate of documents to make sure they're doing what you want them to do. The bottom line is you're either going to take control or you're going to be controlled. And this is a really good time to say, how do I take financial control?
Absolutely.
2 different planes of thought, 14 total resolutions, and as I think Jim mentioned something very good at the beginning, which was you really can't tackle all 14.
Oh, no.
You got to pick 1 or 2,
Right.
and then you can contact, say, Scott at Thrivent and get some help with
Start
looking
at the
others.
beginning.
Yep.
Absolutely. Start at the beginning. Pick something that you can tackle. And Happy New Year to all of our listeners. Thank you again, Jim, for sharing so much of your wisdom with our listeners here this morning.
Any final thoughts for us, Scott?
I'm going to steal Jim's last thought here, very frankly, and that is when you get to the point, and maybe it's a long reach for you, but where you can create lasting and important memories with money, when you reflect back on this year and years past and you say, what are the things that I've done that I really feel good about? Often it is the very things that Jim has really brought to us today. Those memories that you've created, whether it's bringing the family together for an outing, whether it is, and maybe the outing is at the Chanhassen.
That would be a wonderful thing.
But there are so many good ways to do that. And so I really think that's a way to get aligned with your goals and your values.
All right. What do we have for next week, next year, I should say?
Yeah, and next year, well, I've got a great lineup for the next month, but one of the kickoff for next week is John Busacker, who is really a very articulate and gifted motivational speaker, and he has written a new book, and he is going to tell us about his book, and it's really about how to be more and do less. How about that? Be more and do less.
Efficient.
It's a lot of some of the stuff that Jim talked about today about alignment, so tune in next week. It's going to be a great show.
Happy New Year to all of you and to both Scott and Jim. Jim, thanks again for stopping into the show today.
Happy New Year to all of our listeners. And if I can give the phone number one more time,
Please
if they
do.
would like this brochure as well as the free consultation, it is a toll-free number. Is 1-855-346-4332. Give us a call and let's start that progress on your financial plan this year.
You can get that free consultation, a little booklet, a little kit to go out with that.
Absolutely.
Talk to Scott.
Okay.
Thanks for a great year, everyone, for joining us for Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. We'll do it all over again in 2012. Stay safe out there and have a very happy new year from all of us and Scott at Thrivent Financial for Lutherans.
We hope you've enjoyed the past hour of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. While various products may be discussed during the course of this program, please note that these discussions are intended only to educate you about financial topics. They are broad in scope and do not consider your individual personal financial situation. You should work with a qualified financial professional in collaboration with your attorney and tax advisor before implementing any financial decisions which will affect your personal financial situation. Thrivent financial representatives cannot provide legal or tax advice. Your local Thrivent representatives are Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731. Join us again next week for Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell on KMRS Morris.